There we go. Rodney Crowell in the Bing Lounge. Thank you, sir. Thank you for coming in.
You bet.
How's it going?
It's going good.
Good. Tar Paper Sky is the new album Rodney has out right now. It's very good. I would encourage you to go out and buy several copies and pass them around to your best friends.
Good idea.
Tonight at Music Millennium at 7 o'clock, not a true gig in town. I wanted to start off by
hang on, that qualifies as a gig.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I want to thank you. When I first started in radio, I got a job at a country station here in town. And I didn't know anything about country music. My grandpa used to play it a little bit in his station wagon when I was riding around with him.
Mm-hmm.
And
Where was this? Where were you riding?
It was.
Did you grow up here?
Yeah,
This
it was right here. It was in Gresham,
Yeah.
which is just outside of Portland. And it was back in the days when they said, there's the albums, put your show together. And so I had to,
The glory days.
the glory days of radio. But I found your first two albums in amongst all the other stuff that I knew nothing about, and yours.
Yeah, way down at the bottom of the stack.
No, they were there. No, they were there. They were current at the time. That's how long ago this has been. And so it was kind of a soft place for me to land, trying to figure out what I was doing. And I had the program director had to call me up and tell me not to play so many Neil Young songs because I found a Neil Young and a Waylon and all that stuff, and I was doing that real hard. So it was trying to mix that in with the stuff that the other country
now Neil
fans.
Young's country.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, at the time.
or Americana.
Depending on what album
unquote.
he's putting out. Yeah.
Quote unquote.
So you grew up in Crosby, Texas. What's Crosby like? Is that
that's
really small
actually,
town?
My growing up years were in East Houston.
East Houston.
Yeah, I ran away from home to join a band when I was 15 and wound up in a little town called Crosby, which is about 40 miles from where my parents lived. They kind of stood in the driveway and waved goodbye. They didn't seem to be too upset. I guess they thought joining the band was better than running off to join the circus.
Yeah,
but kind of the same.
A little
thing.
bit. I was going to say, case could be made for either one at that point. So you grew up in a musical family? It's always been in part of your life?
Yeah, I did. My father played and sang. He had pretty encyclopedic knowledge of songs. I mean, I was raised on country music for sure. When I was a kid, we had Hank Williams 78s. Basically, my parents just left them on the floor with me and a little record player.
Nice.
It's the first thing I learned to operate, and I'd play Hank Williams records nonstop.
That's so great.
That's where I was, and but my father, we come from. I come from uneducated sharecrop farm stock. Western Kentucky, Western Tennessee. Music was really the only entertainment available, and then 9 times out of 10, music that you made yourself, homemade music. And those that didn't play in my family, and my favorite aunt, she had a little bigger farmhouse than everybody else, and so they just moved the furniture out of the way, and those of us could play, played.
Oh, man.
And those who couldn't dance. So I come from, stock of, good Scots-Irish stock where you drink whiskey and dance and play music, and then Sunday morning go repent and work 4 days and find a good excuse to take off Friday to get warmed up for Friday and Saturday night, and then go back to church Sunday morning. And
it's a pretty good cycle,
not
though.
quite Catholic, you weren't just, 5 Hail Marys or whatever, but, got off pretty light.
Absolutely. You've had the pleasure of meeting some, obviously, your heroes over the years, Waylon and Johnny Cash and Jerry Reed. And can you share one story with us, just one, about any of those guys? It was such an interesting time that you were available to be around.
Well, I'll tell you, Johnny Cash was my father-in-law for 13 years, and then we became really good friends.
Good. After that,
I don't know what that says.
You passed the test,
But I will tell you, when I was just getting started, just made my first album, and I was a single father. The first marriage I had that took place, it ended very quickly, and there was a child involved, and I got the kid. I got custody of the kid, so I got the sympathy vote a lot when I was just coming up, just getting started. I was in Lake Tahoe. I had a gig in one of the side rooms there, and Johnny Cash was in the big room, and I was dating his daughter, just starting. And everybody liked me. It's like, who's this guy, this songwriter guy who's got a 16-month-old baby, you know? So I milked it pretty good. And so Waylon was there. He was in hanging out with John and June, and he got wind that, you know, that I had this little girl. And he really fell in love with her. So at the end of that weekend, you know, Waylon says, what are you doing tomorrow? I said, well, I'm going back to L.A. where I live. And he says, how are you getting there? I said, well, I'm flying. You know, me and my little girl, we're flying back. And he said, I'll give you a ride. I said, no, man. I said, I'm going to fly home. I don't want to ride, you know, 12 hours with this little girl. And he says, I have a Learjet. So I said, I'm going home with you, brother.
Going home with Waylon, yeah.
Now, here's Waylon. You know, we're just me and him and my little girl Hannah on Waylon's Lear. And, I mean, Waylon always had a cigarette in his mouth, and the ashes were always starting to do that curl
Right.
before they fall, you know, and he's biting down on it, you know. No telling what, you know, Waylon had been doing for,
Exactly.
you know. But he's sitting there bouncing my little girl on his knee, you know, with that cigarette ash hanging out, smoke, you know, billowing just all around him, and he's, you know, singing little songs to this 16-month-old child. And it'll always be my most fond memory of Waylon. I loved Waylon. He was a tough old boot, but man, he was such a sweetheart way down deep. And then every time I would see Waylon, the first thing he would say, you know, is, how's Hannah?
Oh.
Always. That's a good story, isn't it?
That's a great story. We'll leave it right there. More from Rodney Crowell and the Bing Louds. Thank you so much.
You bet.